At his enlightenment, the Buddha discovered the path to end all our suffering. And this path is called, in Pali, Dukkha Nirodha, translated into English as end of suffering or ending of suffering. Dukkha is translated as suffering and Nirodha is translated as ending, annihilation of suffering. In his very first sermon, Buddha referred to this path as Majjhima Patipada, translated into English as the middle path, because it lies in between two extremes. In fact, these extremes are mental activities, positive and negative. Positive ending or positive extreme means attachment to pleasures. And the other extreme is called detachment from pleasures. That is translated into English as self-mortification, undergoing suffering. Buddha used the word Kama Sukhalinakani Yogo, meaning in being engaged in sensual pleasures, attachment to sensual pleasures. The other extreme is called Attakila Matan Yoga, translated in English as self-mortification. This is suffering by non-attachment to pleasures. Kama Sukhalinakani Yoga is attachment to pleasures, and Attakili Matani Yoga is detachment from pleasures. At its enlightenment, Buddha realized these are futile extremes. No one can attain the supreme bliss by sensual pleasures or by self-mortification. These extremes he realized as mental states, mental extremes. Our normal mind is actuated by electromagnetism. These extremes of our mind are created by mental magnetism. Enlightenment means removing mental magnetism, retaining pure electricity, which is referred to as light, Aloka Udapadi. That is why he referred to enlightenment as Aloka Udapadi. It is the dawn of light because metaphorically it is the dispelling of darkness of ignorance of the reality of things and beings. It is the realization of the reality that is called Buddhahood, knowing the truth, the reality of things. It is without knowing the reality of things and beings that we get attached to things and beings that are pleasant and resent things and beings that are unpleasant. Buddha realized both attachment and resentment lead to the process of thinking. To preserve the pleasant thing that we are attached to, we have to think. And to get rid of things that are unpleasant, we have to think. Therefore, in his very first sermon called Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, Buddha said, Sankittena panchupadana kanda dukkha. Literary meaning, we suffer due to our thinking process. It is because thinking is resulted in our mental defilements called attachment, called raga in Pali, and resentment called dosa in Pali, and the ignorance of reality called moha in Pali. That is why the supreme bliss of enlightenment is called nirvana, defined by the Buddha in the Nibbana Sutta, saying ragakoya, dosakoya, mohakoya, idam uchyati nibbana. Nirvana is the ending of attachment, resentment, and the ignorance of reality of things and beings. Attachment is a mental magnetic activity. So is detachment or resentment, negative mental magnetic activity, realized by scientists as magnetic attraction and repulsion. There is attraction in raga called attachment, and repulsion, mental repulsion, in the mental activity called dosa, translated into English as resentment. The real path to the end of suffering, the supreme bliss of enlightenment, called nirvana, according to the Buddha, is, as I mentioned earlier, Majjhima Patipada, the middle path that lies in between the two mental magnetic extremes of attachment and resentment. Really speaking, magnetic attraction of the mind and magnetic repulsion of the mind. Attraction and repulsion are motions of the mind. They are called emotions because they are motions. The tranquility of the mind is freedom from motion. Thinking is called a motion of the mind. Thinking is a process where the mind is moving from the non-present into the dead past or into the unborn future. That is roaming. Tranquility in mind is the freedom of the mind from roaming. Roaming of the mind, as I mentioned earlier, is caused by our liking and disliking of things that we experience. Therefore, end of suffering means the end of our liking and disliking. Liking is called raga in Pali, and disliking is called dosa in Pali. The cause of liking and disliking is called moha in Pali, meaning ignorance of the reality of things and beings that we experience. Enlightenment means the dispelling of the darkness of ignorance, called moha andhakara. And what happens after the dispelling of this darkness of ignorance is the dawn of light, called Alokodapadi by the Buddha in his first sermon called Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Therefore, metaphorically, ending of suffering means ending of the darkness called ignorance and the darkness of the mind. Here, darkness metaphorically is not knowing the reality of things and beings that we experience. Once you know it, when we know the reality, they are drawn the light of wisdom to realize the actual nature of things and being that we experience. Buddha realized everything and being that we experience is subjected to decay and death, because every item in this universe is dynamic, is in motion. Motion means changing of the status from moment to moment, and that is called dukkha in Pali. And because of the constant transformation of things and beings, nothing and no being can retain a permanent identity, and that is called anattata. Realizing the reality of things and beings is realizing the dynamism, universal dynamism called by universal energy, which is referred to by Buddha as anicca, and transformation of that mental energy. The transformation calls by that dynamism as dukkhata, and the resultant non-retainability of permanent identity of things and beings is called anattata. Once this is realized, one cannot get attached to things and beings or resent things and beings that are not existing except for a moment of realizing it. Because we come to know things by our mind, by our thoughts. Every thought is made of mental sparks. Every spark is born to die instantly. Therefore, even the present moment is not an actual reality, though we experience it as a reality. This means realizing the reality of things and beings that we experience, that lead to the end of suffering caused by our thinking. Thinking is liking things, dislike things, without knowing the reality of things and beings.